The streets of the city were cold, unforgiving, and filled with the sound of desperate whispers. Amid the busy traffic, the flashing neon lights, and the hurried footsteps of passers-by, a small beggar boy sat on the corner of the street. His clothes were ragged, his face streaked with dirt, but his eyes shone with a strange, intense hope. He sat beside an old, frail woman whose legs were paralyzed from a long-forgotten accident. She sat there every day, begging for spare change, her only company the boy who had become like a son to her. People ignored them, walking past without a second glance. To the world, they were invisible. But the boy wasn't just a beggar. He was a dreamer. And today, his dream would shock everyone. "Uncle," the boy whispered to a passerby who had stopped to drop a few coins in their tin can. His voice was soft but filled with an undeniable certainty. "She will walk again." The man, a businessman on his way to a meeting, barely gave him a glance. "What are you talking about, kid?" he scoffed, shaking his head as he continued on his way. The boy's gaze never wavered, and in his heart he knew that what he had just said wasn't some wild fantasy. It was the truth. The woman beside him, his surrogate mother, had been paralyzed for 5 long years, unable to move from her place on the street corner. But today, something felt different. Today, he could feel the change in the air. "She will walk again," the boy repeated, his voice filled with hope and a quiet determination. "You'll see." Nobody believed him. Nobody could possibly understand the weight of his words or the power behind them. But deep inside, he could feel something stirring, something that told him this was the moment that would change everything. As the hours passed, people continued to walk past, oblivious to the conversation that had just taken place. The beggar woman sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the world around her, her heart heavy with the burden of her circumstances. But then, something began to shift. A tremor ran through her body. Her fingers twitched ever so slightly, and then the most miraculous thing happened. The woman, with slow but steady movements, began to rise. Her legs, once stiff and unyielding, now moved with a cautious strength. The beggar boy's words echoed in the stillness of the street. "She will walk again." And in that very moment, the world stopped. Time slowed down. The people who had ignored them all these years, the ones who had dismissed the boy's prophecy, turned around. They stopped, their eyes wide in disbelief. The beggar woman, who had been a fixture of this street corner for as long as they could remember, was now standing. Her legs, once paralyzed, were now holding her weight, her body trembling but upright. The boy's eyes locked with hers, and for the first time in years, she saw something in his face. An unwavering belief that defied all logic, all reason. She could feel the truth of his words deep within her soul. She will walk again. The street around them became a blur, the noise of the city fading into the background as the crowd watched in stunned silence. The woman took a few faltering steps, her feet unsteady on the cracked pavement, but with each step, her confidence grew. It was as though the boy's words had unlocked something deep inside her, a strength she had long since lost. And then, with a final triumphant step, she stood tall. The crowd erupted in disbelief, gasps of awe and wonder filling the air. The man who had scoffed at the boy earlier stood frozen, his mouth agape. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. A miracle? Or was it something else entirely? The beggar boy smiled, his heart swelling with pride. He knew the truth, and now, so did everyone else. The woman wasn't just walking, she was walking because she had believed. And because she had believed, so had he. They both had been invisible, for so long. But today, they were seen. The boy ran to her, his small feet echoing on the pavement. He reached up, grabbing her hand, and together, they walked. The crowd parted in awe, and for the first time in years, they weren't just beggars. They were people. People with a story, people with a miracle, people who had defied the odds. As they walked into the unknown, The boy turned to the woman, his voice filled with emotion. "I told you," he whispered. "I told you that you would walk again." And in that moment, the woman realized something she had never dared to hope for. That miracles weren't always grand, they weren't always flashy. Sometimes they were just the quiet, unshakable belief of a child who refused to give up, who believed in her when no one else did. This was just the beginning, and the world would never forget them again. The streets, always bustling with people, in a hurry, often overlooked the ones who needed help the most. In a small corner of this busy city sat a beggar boy with his surrogate mother, a woman paralyzed from the waist down. Each day, they faced the harsh realities of street life. They were invisible to the crowds. No one stopped to notice them. No one cared to ask about their pasts or their stories. They were just another part of the city's backdrop. But there was something about the beggar boy that made him different from the others. His eyes. They weren't the eyes of a child who had lost all hope. No, they were filled with something rare, innocence, belief, and a quiet strength that belied his young age. His heart was pure, untouched by the cruelty that had shaped the lives of so many others around him. Despite the filth and poverty that surrounded them, despite the cold stares and harsh words, the boy never lost his smile, and the woman, despite her condition, had a grace about her. Her frailty only amplified the sympathy she drew from those who dared to look her way. People sometimes threw coins into their tin can, a token of pity or guilt. But no one ever stopped to ask who she was, what her life had been like before her accident. No one understood her inner strength, the way she had managed to survive in a world that had abandoned her long ago. The boy, with his childlike innocence, would often speak to her as if she was more than just a woman sitting on the streets. To him, she wasn't a beggar. She was his protector, his guide, and in some ways, the mother he never had. And in her, he found something he desperately needed, a reason to keep going. He would sit beside her, his small hand resting gently on her frail shoulder, whispering stories of things beyond the street corner. He would tell her about places he dreamed of visiting, things he wished he could do for her. One day, as they sat there, the boy looked up at the crowd of busy pedestrians rushing past. He didn't see them as the people who ignored them every day. Instead, he saw the world full of possibilities, full of hope. "She will walk again," the boy said quietly to a passerby who stopped for a brief moment to drop a coin into their can. His words were spoken with such innocence, such unwavering certainty, that for a brief second, the man's heart softened. The man didn't stop to ask more, but there was something in the boy's tone that made him pause. For the boy, it wasn't just a wish. It was a belief, a promise he had made to the woman who had always been there for him. He had no doubt in his heart. He had watched her struggle every day, but he never allowed her to feel defeated. His innocence, his belief in her ability to rise again, had become the fuel that kept both of them going. The boy's belief didn't stem from knowledge or logic. It came from a place of pure love and hope, a place where the boundaries of reality didn't exist. To him, miracles were possible because he still saw the world with childlike wonder. He didn't know that the world had a way of breaking dreams. He didn't know that people would laugh at his words, dismiss his hope as naive. All he knew was that he loved her, and that love was enough to make anything possible. When she took that first step, when she rose from her place on the pavement, the innocence of the boy's words became reality. He had spoken the truth all along. And it wasn't just a miraculous event. It was a testament to the purity of his heart, his undying belief in the woman who had given him love and care when the world had offered them nothing but misery. The innocence of the boy became the symbol of hope, not just for the beggar woman, but for everyone who had forgotten what it meant to dream. In his heart, he had never doubted that she could walk again. And now, everyone else was forced to believe in the power of his pure, unshakable innocence. It was that belief that had made the impossible come true. In the end, as she walked, her frail body supported by her newfound strength, The boy's innocence wasn't just a small part of the story. It was the catalyst for change. His untainted heart had managed to shift the tides of fate, and in doing so, he had reminded the world of something precious: the power of belief, the strength that comes from a heart untainted by the harshness of life. As the crowd watched in awe, the boy turned to the woman, his voice filled with quiet pride. "I told you," he whispered, his innocence still shining through. "I told you that you would walk again." And in that moment, everyone knew. Innocence, when coupled with love and unwavering belief, had the power to transform the world. The city, in all its glory and grime, had become a place where the indifferent hustle of daily life drowned out the cries of those who needed help the most. For years, people had walked by the beggar woman and the boy, too busy with their own lives to stop and question their story, their pain, or their plight. They had been written off as part of the city's scenery, unseen, unheard, and unloved. But that was about to change. As the beggar boy's words echoed through the streets, "She will walk again," the layers of apathy that had built up over the years began to crack. The words didn't come from a place of desperation. They came from a deep, unshakable belief, a belief that defied the world's cynicism and judgment. But it wasn't just the boy's words that were powerful. It was what they revealed about the world around them, about the people who passed them by every day without a second thought. For the businessman who had dismissed the boy with a scoff, something stirred deep within him as he walked away. He had been in a rush, hurrying to his meeting, too consumed by his own life to see the boy's innocence and the woman's silent struggle. But when he heard the boy speak, it was as though a switch was flipped in his mind. He'd heard the boy's words, but more than that, he'd seen the look in the boy's eyes, the unwavering hope, the absolute certainty that something beautiful and powerful could happen, even in the midst of the harshest circumstances. The businessman, who had spent his life building a fortune, now found himself questioning the very things that had driven him. He had never thought twice about the homeless, the beggars, or the broken. To him, they were simply people who had made poor choices, people who weren't a part of the world he lived in. But the boy's words challenged everything he had believed. And he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to life than wealth, status, and success. What was it about the boy's simple statement that made him stop in his tracks? Why did the boy's belief in his mother, someone whom the world had discarded, seem so powerful, so impossible to ignore? As the woman slowly, shakily rose to her feet and took that first tentative step, the businessman was forced to confront his own heart. For the first time, he saw beyond the labels, beyond the outer shell of poverty and pain. He saw a person, a human being who had once been full of life, someone with dreams, hopes, and a story that deserved to be heard. He saw the power of belief, of love, and of a dream that could lift someone from the depths of despair. It was in that moment that the businessman experienced a moral awakening. His priorities, once consumed by wealth and success, suddenly felt hollow in comparison to the strength of the beggar boy's hope. The boy's belief had shattered the businessman's perception of the world, of what was truly valuable, of what it meant to be human. But this was just the beginning. The awakening didn't stop with the businessman. As more people witnessed the miracle of the beggar woman standing and walking, something began to shift in the hearts of the crowd. The passers-by who had previously ignored the beggars on the corner now stopped to watch, their eyes wide with disbelief and wonder. They had seen the woman every day. How could they have never noticed her before? How had they never truly seen her suffering, her pain, her courage? The awakening wasn't just an individual moment. It was a collective shift. In the face of such a powerful act of defiance against fate, against life's injustices, the crowd was forced to question their own actions, their own choices, their own moral compass. They couldn't ignore the fact that they had looked past this woman, this child, for so long, assuming they were invisible, assuming their suffering was just part of the world's natural order. Now the crowd saw that this was no ordinary miracle. It was a wake-up call, a challenge to look beyond appearances, to recognize the value of every individual, no matter their circumstances. It was a reminder that we are all interconnected, that the world we build is shaped by how we treat the most vulnerable among us. As the beggar woman walked, the boy by her side, a wave of empathy began to ripple through the crowd. Some people stepped forward to help her, offering her a seat or a hand. Others, like the businessman, made silent promises to themselves that they would change. They would no longer walk past without seeing, without acknowledging the pain and struggles of those who had been forgotten. The moral awakening didn't just change the lives of the beggar woman and the boy. It changed everyone who witnessed the miracle. It forced them to confront their own complacency, to reconsider their values, and to make a choice. To continue living in a world where people were invisible, or to build a world where every life mattered. In the end, the boy's simple statement, "She will walk again," wasn't just a prediction of what would happen physically. It was a declaration of hope, of possibility, of human connection. It was a call to action, a reminder that no one is truly invisible, and that everyone deserves to be seen, loved, and cared for. And as the crowd watched the woman take her first steps into a new life, they realized that the true miracle wasn't just her physical healing, it was the healing of their own hearts, the awakening of their empathy, and the recognition that they too had the power to change the world around them. The air felt thick with anticipation as the beggar woman, with her thin, frail legs trembling beneath her, slowly and cautiously shifted her weight. The crowd, once oblivious, now stood in hushed silence, their eyes locked onto her every movement. The young boy beside her, his face a picture of hope and determination, looked up at her, his gaze filled with unwavering belief. "Mom, you can do it. Just one more step," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the quiet murmur of the crowd. There was something so pure, so raw in that moment. In that simple phrase, spoken by a child who had nothing but the love he felt for his mother. Everything seemed to change. The crowd could feel it, the weight of that love, the gravity of what was about to happen. The beggar woman who had lived her entire life shackled by pain, by loss, and by a world that had forgotten her, was now being asked to do the impossible, to stand, to walk, to rise above the life that had been thrust upon her. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked down at her feet, almost as though she didn't believe it herself. How could she? The years of sitting on that cold, unforgiving pavement had left their mark on her body. The world had laughed at her, had cast her aside like a discarded rag. And yet here she was, trying to defy the very limits her body had imposed on her. The boy's grip tightened around her hand, his tiny fingers curling with desperate hope. "You'll walk again, Mom," he said again, more forcefully this time, as if his words held the power to make the impossible a reality. The crowd held its breath, the moment suspended in time, as they all waited for her to make that choice, to stand, to fight, to show them all what true strength looked like. Then, in a flash of determination, she took that first shaky step. The poor woman's body trembled with every move, but with each small, unsteady step, the crowd felt a shift. There was something almost magical about it, a moment of profound, shared humanity. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to choke, and yet it wasn't just about her physical movement. It was about everything that had led to this moment, the years of suffering, of being ignored, of being treated as invisible. It was about the unspoken promise she had made to herself and to her son, the promise that, no matter how difficult life had been, she would never give up. Not now. Not ever. And then, as the crowd watched, something extraordinary happened. She took another step, and another, slowly, deliberately, but with an undeniable strength that came from somewhere deep within. With every movement, the crowd's hearts seemed to collectively beat faster, as if their hopes and prayers were somehow tied to her. The businessman who had first walked past them, dismissing the boy's statement with a cynical laugh, felt his heart tighten. He had seen people fall before, seen them struggle. But this was something different. This was a woman fighting for her life, her dignity, and the future of her child. As she stood taller, with more confidence, his gaze softened. His world, once dominated by cold logic and wealth, was suddenly pierced by the raw power of human perseverance. Tears blurred his vision, but they weren't the tears of pity. They were tears of recognition. He saw, perhaps for the first time, what true courage looked like. It wasn't in the wealth you amassed or the power you held. It was in moments like this, in the act of standing up, of refusing to let life defeat you, even when the odds were stacked against you. It was in the love a mother had for her child, a love so powerful that it could move mountains. For the woman, this was the culmination of a dream she had long since abandoned. Until now. Her breath came in shaky gasps as she finally stood tall, her legs still unsteady, but strong enough to hold her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of the world pressing down on her. For the first time, she felt as though she could breathe freely, as if the shackles of her past had been broken, even if just for a moment. The boy, his heart bursting with pride, whispered, "See, Mom? I knew you could do it." And in that moment, something in the crowd snapped. It wasn't just awe. It was the shared understanding that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The woman wasn't just walking, she was showing them all what it meant to hope, to believe, and to fight for what seemed impossible. Her strength, born of a mother's love and a child's faith, had become a beacon, a reminder that no matter how far we fall, there is always a chance to rise again. The businessman, now standing motionless, felt a wave of emotion wash over him. His eyes locked on the woman, and he understood, perhaps for the first time, what truly mattered in life. Not the numbers in his bank account, not the prestige he had built, but the human spirit. The resilience of people like the woman who, despite everything, refused to give up. In that brief, heart-stopping moment, the entire world seemed to pause. The woman's steps, though small, were symbolic of a larger victory. A victory over despair, over pain, over a world that had forgotten her. And in that victory, the crowd, strangers once detached from her existence, had found their own moment of emotional awakening. As the woman continued to walk, slowly but surely, the entire street seemed to pulse with life. People who had once turned their heads in indifference now cheered, their voices rising in a crescendo of support. The boy's smile was wide and uncontainable, and the woman's face, though still marked with hardship, now glowed with something new. Hope. It wasn't just the physical act of standing up, it was everything that came with it. The love, the strength, and the belief that even the most broken among us could find a way to heal. That was the true magic of the moment. It was the purest, most emotional moment any of them had ever witnessed, and it was a moment that would stay with them forever. The woman's heart pounded in her chest as she took another step. The familiar ache in her legs was a harsh reminder of how far she had fallen, how low the world had pushed her. Yet with every step, her resolve strengthened. She was no longer just a beggar. She was a mother, a protector. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but today she was determined to show her son that nothing could keep her down. The boy standing beside her was a constant source of quiet strength. His small hand gripped hers with a power that belied his years. It was as if he could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders, but also the force of her refusal to let go. His innocent eyes were filled with an unshakable belief in her. He didn't see the frailty that others did. To him, she was his hero. And no matter how many times she stumbled, how many times she faltered, he believed that she could stand tall again. She glanced down at him briefly, her face softening with a fierce love. "We're going to be okay. she whispered, her voice hoarse, but filled with certainty. It was a promise, an unbreakable vow. She would not let him down, she could not. The world had taken so much from them already. She would not allow it to strip them of their dignity, their hope, their future. Each step was a battle, but with every wobble of her knees, every shake of her body, her determination grew stronger. The crowd watched in stunned silence, unsure of what they were witnessing. A woman who had once been invisible to them, an anonymous face on the street, was now showing them something far more powerful than any material wealth or success. She was showing them the sheer strength of will, the kind of determination that was born not out of greed, but out of love and survival. Her mind raced with thoughts of her son, of how she had never given up on him, even when the world had turned its back. He had seen her fall many times before, but he had never seen her stop trying. Today would be no different. She wasn't just walking for herself. She was walking for him, for the future they both dreamed of. As her legs trembled beneath her, she pushed herself harder. She could hear the whispers of the crowd, the doubt in their voices as they wondered if she would make it. Would she fall again? Would she give up? But she didn't care about their doubt. This was for him. This was for their chance at a life beyond the cold, unforgiving pavement. "One more step, Mom," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible, but it was enough to fuel her determination. She looked down at him, her eyes filled with unshed tears, and nodded. He believed in her. His belief was everything. "One more step," she repeated to herself like a mantra, her breath quickening. She pushed through the pain, through the doubts that threatened to overwhelm her, through the weight of all the years that had tried to crush her spirit. She was stronger than all of it. She was more than just a beggar. She was a mother who would do anything to give her son a better life. The crowd, once silent, now began to murmur. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others in admiration. The businessman who had walked past her earlier, dismissing her and her son with a glance, stood frozen in place, watching with a mixture of awe and respect. He had seen people overcome obstacles, seen them struggle and fall, but this was something different. This was the will of a mother, a force unlike any other. Her legs shook with every movement, but she didn't stop. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest, for release, but she kept going. She would not let herself fall. Not now. Not ever again. With each step, she felt a new sense of power coursing through her veins. The world that had once seen her as invisible was now watching her, seeing her, truly seeing her. For the first time. Her determination was unwavering. The woman who had once begged on the streets, whose life had been reduced to nothing but a series of struggles, now stood tall. She was doing something she had thought impossible. And she wasn't alone. The boy was there, his small hand gripping hers with a strength beyond his years, helping her, guiding her with every step. The more she walked, the more she realized that this wasn't just about her struggle. It was about the love that had carried her all these years, the love that had kept her alive when the world had tried to bury her. And for that love, she would keep fighting. For that love, she would keep walking. As she reached the edge of the street, the crowd parted, giving her space to move forward. The businessman, still standing there, could hardly believe his eyes. He had expected her to fail. He had expected her to collapse in a heap of exhaustion. But she didn't. She stood tall, her chest heaving with each breath, but she was upright. She was walking, and in that moment, he understood. He understood the strength that had been within her all along. He understood that sometimes the greatest wealth wasn't measured in dollars or possessions, but in the human spirit. The resilience to rise, to keep going, no matter how many times you've fallen. The woman's steps grew more confident, her pace faster, as if the road ahead was no longer filled with obstacles. It was filled with possibilities. For the first time in years, she could see a future a future where she wasn't just surviving but living. And for the boy standing beside her, every step his mother took was a victory. Not just over the physical limitations of her body, but over the limitations the world had placed on her. She was showing him that no matter how hard life got, he could always. With every step she took, the air around them seemed to crackle with energy. It was the power of love, of protection, of a determination that refused to be broken. No matter how many times the world tried to knock her down, she would always rise, stronger and more determined than ever. And in that moment, as she walked alongside her son, the crowd could feel it too. The world had underestimated her. But now, they would never forget her. The atmosphere was heavy with uncertainty. The street was crowded, the sounds of bustling traffic and murmurs of the crowd blending into a cacophony. Yet, in the midst of it all, a profound silence seemed to envelop the small figure standing at the center of it all. The woman, though battered and broken, stood with her son by her side. Every step she had taken until now had been a triumph of willpower, but she knew the most difficult part was still ahead. She felt the tension in the air, a palpable fear that threatened to suffocate her. The road she walked on was no longer just a path. It was a symbol of everything she had overcome and everything she had yet to face. The crowd was watching closely now, their collective breath held as they waited for her to stumble. It wasn't cruelty, but the natural inclination to doubt. How could someone like her, someone who had fallen so low, stand up again? How could someone whose body had been broken by the weight of life's cruelest burdens rise again? Her legs wobbled beneath, the pain in her joints almost unbearable. She had been walking for what felt like an eternity, and yet the destination remained so far away. The small, stubborn voice in her head urged her to push forward, to keep fighting, but every ounce of her body screamed for rest. She clenched her teeth, willing herself to ignore the pain. She couldn't stop now, not after everything she had been through. Not after her son had believed in her when no one else had. Her eyes shifted to the boy at her side. His small hand gripped hers tightly, his face filled with an expression that reflected unwavering trust. To him, his mother was invincible. She was the one who had held him when the world had threatened to tear them apart. She was the one who had taught him that the only limits that existed were the ones you set for yourself. But even in the light of his pure faith, she could feel the weight of the world's judgment pressing down on her. The businessman, who had been standing in the crowd, looked at her with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. His eyes scanned the scene, watching as she took another faltering step. There was a flicker of doubt in his expression, an uncertainty that matched the feeling hanging in the air. He had seen countless people who had tried to overcome their circumstances only to fall short. The odds were stacked against her, and he wondered if this would be just another futile attempt. But then, something shifted. There was a quiet moment, a stillness in the crowd as they all waited, breathlessly, for the next move. It was as if time itself had slowed. The woman's eyes narrowed with determination, her gaze hardening as she focused on the road ahead. Her heart raced, but it was no longer from fear. It was from something else. A powerful, burning desire to prove that she was more than what the world saw her to be. She took another step. The crowd watched, their collective gaze fixed on her every movement. It was as if the entire world had paused, holding its breath in anticipation. Would she fall? Would she succeed? The moment felt suspended in time. And then, as if in slow motion, her legs began to tremble. She could feel the heaviness in her body, the weight of years of struggle pulling her down. Her knees buckled slightly, but she didn't let herself fall. She couldn't. Not now. Not when her son was watching her with such hope in his eyes. Not when the world was finally seeing her for what she was, a survivor. Her mind raced, but there was one thought that pierced through the chaos. I will not let this define me. With a deep breath, She focused all her energy into one final, defiant push. She tightened her grip on her son's hand, the two of them connected in a bond stronger than any doubt or pain. Her legs burned with every step, but she moved forward. Slowly at first, but then faster, more confidently. The road ahead seemed less daunting now. It wasn't just a physical road. It was a metaphor for everything she had overcome and everything she still had to fight for. The businessman, who had been watching with detached curiosity, now felt his chest tighten. He had seen people struggle before, but this was something different. He saw the fire in her eyes, the unyielding spirit that refused to give up. It wasn't just about walking anymore. It was about reclaiming her dignity, her future, her life. It was about proving to herself and to everyone else that she was far more than the world had labeled her. The crowd was no longer just silent. They were holding their breath, waiting for her to break. But she didn't. She kept walking, each step more powerful than the last. The businessman felt a knot tighten in his stomach, a growing admiration for this woman whose strength defied all odds. He knew deep down that something monumental was happening before his eyes, and then, in that moment, something extraordinary happened. The woman's feet hit the ground with a new energy. She wasn't just walking anymore, she was striding. Her body, once trembling and weak, was now moving with purpose. She was no longer the broken, homeless beggar who had once asked for pity. She was the embodiment of strength, of resilience, of the indomitable human spirit. The crowd began to murmur, then gasp. The whispers of doubt turned into gasps of amazement. People were seeing her in a new light, not as the helpless woman they had once ignored, but as a symbol of triumph over adversity. She was walking, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been told they weren't enough. She was walking for her son, for the future they would build together. And as her feet continued to move, she knew that this moment, this struggle, wasn't just about walking again. It was about taking back her life, one step at a time. The businessman, who had been skeptical at first, could no longer hide the awe in his eyes. He watched as she reached the end of the street, her pace steady, her heart stronger than ever. This woman, who had once been invisible, had shown the world what true strength looked like. And in that moment, he understood. There was something far more valuable than wealth. It was the strength to rise when everyone else counted you out. It was the power of the human spirit, unbroken, unyielding, and unstoppable. The woman's footsteps echoed in the silent street. With every stride, she proved something to the world, and to herself. She wasn't just walking again, she was living, she was free. And the crowd, moved by her strength, knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. The inspiration was undeniable. And in that moment, the world would never be the same. As the woman continued her steady march forward, her once weak and trembling steps now radiated confidence and resolve. The murmurs of the crowd slowly faded into silence, replaced by a powerful stillness that enveloped the entire street. Time itself seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the inevitable, profound moment of transformation. And in that moment, something inside her, something deep, something raw, began to shift. She had always wondered for so long if she would ever find the strength to stand tall again. She had asked herself countless times whether the pain she had endured, the isolation, the rejection, the years of struggle, would ever be worth it. But now, as she walked with each step she took, she realized something profound. It wasn't just about the struggle. It wasn't about the pain or the hardships. It was about the choice to rise. It was about choosing to believe that there was something more, something greater beyond the darkness. Her son, standing beside her, looked up at her with wide eyes filled with wonder. His belief in her had been unwavering, even when she had doubted herself. In his innocent gaze, she saw a reflection of hope, a belief that anything was possible. She had always wanted to show him that there was more to life than the struggles they had faced, and now she was doing it. She was proving to him and to herself that there was a way forward, no matter how hard the journey had been. And as they walked together, hand in hand, she realized that this moment was bigger than just her. It was a moment of healing for them both. The businessman who had been standing on the sidelines, watching with quiet admiration, felt a deep shift within himself. He had witnessed countless people in his life, but this woman, this resilient, unyielding spirit, had left an indelible mark on his heart. She had shown him what it meant to fight, not just for survival, but for the future. The doubts he had, once carried, had dissolved, replaced with a profound respect for this woman who had turned her pain into power. He walked toward her slowly, his heart racing with the realization of what he had just witnessed. As he approached her, the crowd parted, sensing the moment of clarity that was unfolding. The woman's eyes met his, and in that silent exchange there was an understanding. She no longer needed validation from the world. She no longer needed to prove herself to anyone. She had already won. Not the businessman watched the two of them, a quiet respect in his heart. He knew that he would never forget this moment, this woman who had shown him what true strength meant. He would carry this lesson with him for the rest of his life, that sometimes the greatest wealth isn't measured in money. It's measured in the strength of the human spirit, and the unwavering belief that no matter how far we fall, we can always rise again. And as the woman, her son by her side, walked away from the crowd, the applause still echoing behind them, she knew that the world had changed for her. It had changed for them both. She had found her strength, her clarity, and her hope. And nothing at all could take that away from her. This wasn't just the end of her journey. It was the beginning of something new, a future full of possibilities, of dreams yet to be realized, and of a life that was finally hers to live. The woman had walked again, but more importantly, she had found herself. And in doing so, she had given hope to the world.